Now, I'm a big believer in collaboration and teamwork. I don't think any business should exist just on its own. Even if we work for ourselves, we're a one-man band, or we're in a position of leadership and management that can sometimes feel quite lonely, I think that's all the more reason to build a collaborative network, joint projects, teamwork, and so on. I think there's risks and opportunities that come with the current situation, working online or hybrid, that maybe challenges how innovation, collaboration, and teamwork can happen. And it's with that context that we chat to business change specialist, cultural specialist, and innovation specialist, Judith McMinn. We talk about all sorts of topics, from the power of networks, what stops us, how we can listen better, innovation from small organizations and big business. She's had 20 years of experience working at the very top of political offices and to organizations around the world, to startup. And she's in the very midst of a startup journey herself. So lots of experience, lots of insight shared. So let's see what me and Judith talked about, and I hope you enjoy. We'll see you soon. Hello and welcome along. I'm Rob Taylor from Dads in Business, the network that aims to help busy dads at work and in business bring the best of themselves to home and to work. And this series aims to do that by bringing in experts in the field of business development, personal development, culture change, and many more topics in the realm of business and personal development. And today I'm delighted that we've got business change management expert Judith McMinn, isn't it? Yes. I've looked at that so many times. McMinn or McNinn? It's McMinn. Judith McMinn, business change management specialist. Judith, give us a bit of an introduction about your areas of expertise before we dive into a conversation about innovation and collaboration today.
Well, hello, Rob, and hello to everyone listening. Thanks so much for the opportunity to join. Yeah, I'm Judith McMinn. I've spent 20 years working in large-scale change programs. I've been working with people change, process change, cultural change in pretty complex environments and across the world. I've done that through working in large management consultancy firms, and then also 5 years working for a former Prime Minister in his office. And the last couple of years, I've been working in and around the startup environment, looking at bringing a new product to market, which I have to say is probably the most difficult and the most challenging project that I've ever worked on.
More so than working for a Prime Minister's office.
Absolutely. That says a lot, really, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
I spent 5 years working for Tony Blair shortly after he left office. I joined to essentially change his business. He had a consultancy business which advised prime ministers and presidents, and I joined it when it was quite early stage, and to reform it into a much more scalable business. And we started working across 30 legal jurisdictions, small teams advising prime ministers and presidents. And as you can imagine, there was a lot of complexity to that. There was a lot of media scrutiny to that. And there was a lot of finding the right people to be part of that business. And I had 5 fantastic years doing that and changing that business. And then ultimately bringing together all of Mr. Blair's charitable and political and commercial entities under one new roof and under one new entity called the Tony Blair Institute for Global Change, which is now a very leading think tank globally, and with about 500 people based in London and around the world.
Wow, there's so many fascinating. We could have conversations about that all day. I'm sure there's so many stories to tell. But Judith, I mean, obviously the world's changed a lot in an incomprehensible short space of time, hasn't it? And I guess since March 2020, where do you see organizations changing? What are going to be the sort of most prominent changes that need to be addressed by organizations, do you think?
Well, I think, there's the very physical and the very obvious changes we see about more and more people working from home. And, that makes it quite difficult, I think, in some industries and in some businesses for that collaboration of ideas and thoughts and that creativity. And I suppose particularly when you have, new joiners into an organization, or you've, entry level graduate or non-graduate or apprenticeship style roles, it's very hard for people to understand and appreciate a culture, to integrate with colleagues, learn and upskill when you're sitting at the kitchen table or you're sitting in the spare bedroom. And I think that's when we do at some point return to spending more time in the office. And I don't think we'll ever go back to the traditional sort of, 4 days in an office. Like I think it will be this blended and this hybrid mix of working. But that's certainly one change that I have noticed myself. I used to spend 5 days a week in London, traveling on a Monday, traveling on a Friday. And I haven't done that obviously in almost 2 years. And I just think that sort of that lack of being able to collaborate in a way is more difficult. As much as Zoom and other forums are fantastic for connecting people, you miss that. I also think, but one of the really big positives in this has been actually people understanding that there's more to life than work. We've all had an insight into each other's lives. I think 3 or 4 years ago, if somebody had said, "I want to speak to you from your bedroom," it would have been highly inappropriate. Now, we've let people into our homes. We've shared with people the challenges around childcare and isolation. And that's been good. It's been really good because it's probably facilitated a better understanding of who we are individually, who we are as a team, and who we are as organizations, and an appreciation of some of those things before that we just assumed everybody had the same life as us, or we assumed a stereotypical life for people. And I think that will actually help around a greater appreciation of diversity and inclusion, to understand that, well, not everybody just lives like us.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think it's a great introduction. And I think there's a few points that sort of leapt out at me there. I was just talking to one of my kids' mates' dads this morning at the swimming lessons, and he was saying that there's only now, because of the pandemic, there's only 60% of the desks available compared to the amount of people that work at his organization. So how that's changed is crazy. And also, I remember I was reading Steve Jobs' biography many years ago on my honeymoon. I did have fun as well, but I was reading Steve Jobs' biography, and they were saying how they built Apple in a way to encourage collisions to happen. So departments would just walk past each other and have conversations. And I always remember it reminded me of my science, where the more heat you add to water, the more frequent collisions, and that's where energy comes from. And I think if we've removed that totally, things like this, things like a Zoom or a Teams or whichever platform you use, accidental conversations can't happen anymore because it's all deliberate. And while, yes, we can see behind the curtain, I guess, and you get a sneak peek into people's lives, I wonder how that is going to affect, not necessarily productivity, because I think we can probably do more in less time, but how it does damage collaboration, teamwork, and therefore innovation moving forward. Do you see that as a bit of a risk?
Yeah, I mean, I think what you've always got to remember about collaboration is that you need diversity of thought and opinion, insight and challenge. And you need to create an environment that facilitates that. And the easiest way to do that is to bring people together in the same location and, avoid siloed thinking, siloed conversations, siloed organization of people. And the most, creative organizations are the ones that, allow those conversations very freely, and also probably really, they understand the challenge they're against. They're always, wanting to be better. They never sit on their laurels. And I think, that's possibly one of the things that maybe we haven't, which has, even as much as we try and facilitate conversations, the analogy you're using about people bumping into each other, it means that, people are always thinking, it's always in mind. Whereas, unless, as you say, if you're having these forced conversations or these slightly scheduled conversations, then it probably keeps people into ever so slightly siloed thinking, because they're only thinking about it at that time or when they need to speak up. But I can't say enough about, everything certainly that I've worked on, for the last 20 years has been around bringing the best ideas and the best insights and the best nuggets from individuals. No one has the right answer, not even the former prime ministers, not even the presidents. Everything that is developed and matures from a strategy into an execution of policy or whatever comes from a melting pot of ideas and insight and challenge. And refinement. Nothing that ever goes out is right, spot on. It always evolves and iterates. And that, I think, is something that, you know, people probably don't realize how much effort and how much hard work goes into get something that's still only half right when the wider public see it.
Yeah, my one of my business partners, he always says version 1's better than version none. I think as long as you get something out there, you can always tweak and evolve and innovate and make the provision better. And I think on the topic of collaboration, there was a quote, I think it was Jim Rohn, who says you can't succeed in business by yourself. And I think, you know, we certainly speak to a lot of owner managed businesses, a lot of small businesses, but also business leaders, where I think it becomes more lonely at the top, if you like, and those conversations happen less. And I think there's a risk, isn't there, that working by yourself, you always create your own echo chamber where your ideas are the best, because you can't share that, or you can't take influence from others. And has that cropped up in the work that you've done before? Do you notice that, and how can we overcome that?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, when you're working on sensitive commercial information, you know, it's not something that you can speak freely about. So, you know, you have to build a sort of small inner circle to talk about that. But you have to be, when you're leading or when anything, you have to have ears. You have to hear, and you have to listen, and you have to respond. And those are three very distinct things. There are a lot of people who hear but don't listen. There are a lot of people who listen but don't hear, and there are a lot of people who hear and listen but don't do anything about it. And, you know, I think it's really important. I think we've probably not quite appreciated how good you need to be at hearing and listening and really understanding what people have to say. And that's not to say that you agree or appease people on what you do, but that's a real skill that I think the most successful people who lead organizations have, that they either can do it themselves or they have people around them to help do it. And the ability to listen and to respond accordingly, to listen to feedback. But you're right, at the top is very lonely. When you're doing projects on your own, it's very lonely. You are in a position of self-doubt. You think, am I doing the right thing? And particularly when you're leading on quite radical change, whether that's a process change, whether it's a people change, you know that whatever you're going to do, it's going to change people's lives or people's work, or it's going to change the profit of an organization. And that's stressful. And that's why it's important to build support networks. It's important to get that diversity of thought. It's important to take time to do things without taking too long to do it, of course, and having the right experts to guide you through some of the things that you know may or may not. But of course, you never can know what's coming. I mean, that's always the challenge when you're planning change. I mean, you know, you can never see the full road ahead. You can see some of the bumps, but then it's the unexpected, the disbenefits that come along the way.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you mentioned something about getting things done almost in an agreed time frame, or just getting things done in a reasonable time frame. And I think for me, what crops up from collaboration is the benefit of accountability. I think oftentimes, if you're, I guess from my own experiences, if you're on your own, it's easy just to say, I'll do it next time. I'll do it next time, because you're only accountable to yourself. And I think if, you know, my core business projects are all collaborations. Ultimately, I have a sales training organization that's myself clinging onto my youth, but my business partner there was globally responsible for how Shell sell around the world. So there's a real contribution from each of us that makes something greater than the sum of its parts, I guess. But on this point, for me, accountability is so vital, not only to yourself, but then you're accountable to someone else. And I guess, would you encourage people to find that either within their business or in a support network of other relevant businesses, if they are on their own as a one-man or one-woman band? Would you encourage that to be found anyway?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I think mentorship and having a mentor is really important. You know, because it does force you to look in the mirror at yourself, because they're the person holding the mirror, and they're also the person with the listening ear. So they're just not just pointing out all the faults. They're trying to help you, you know, problem solve against that. But you're right. You need to be accountable. You need to be driven. You need to be responsible. You know, and by that I mean, you know, you need to be responsible in terms of what you're doing and doing it in the right way, and then accountable for success or not. So mentorship for me has been important. Seeing what good looks like, seeing the good, the bad, and the ugly, things that you don't want to replicate. I mean, there's so much in business about, the lessons you take away from failure, and there is, there's you don't do anything that you don't learn something from, about yourself, about others, about culture, about the environment that you're operating in, and about your support network. It's a true learning experience.
No, I think so. I think, is it Amazon or Jeff Bezos that encourage successful failure?
Yeah.
Make sure it's okay to fail, but take lessons from it and spin that forward into something more, I guess, successful, right? We have to learn from our mistakes.
And one of the best pieces of advice I ever got quite early on in my career, but I have to say I didn't quite appreciate it until probably a bit further in, and that was that a career is a long game. And at the start, when you're pretty early in a career, like, you think, what does that mean? You're looking for the next promotion or whatever. But when you get into like a sort of mid-career point, you realize, yeah, actually it is a long game, and actually you need to keep your energy, you need to keep your focus, you need to keep yourself injury-free. All of those analogies to sport, and what we perceive a game to be. Sometimes you need to keep your cards very close to your tactics, very close to your chest. Sometimes you need to say, it's not my game today. I need to be on the bench, and you need to slack off. And that, was a really very simple piece of advice. But I think it's a piece of advice that actually says to people, does say, a career is a long game. It's not a job or a role, maybe months or a few years, but the career, that's a 40-year thing for most people.
Yeah, if you truly find, I guess, your purpose and your professional purpose, then that's your life, isn't it? That is your professional life.
And even if you change careers, and even if you move from one role or one job to another, in a very different setting, for the most part, people still have a career that spans, 40 years. They might move from one job to another, or one industry to another, but they're still, most part, still working, or still adding something, outside of just personal hobbies.
Yeah. And you mentioned there about mentorship. I assume you'd encourage every professional, whether they're in business or in their own business, to find that mentor.
Yeah. And it doesn't need to be a big grand title, you don't need to go out and sort of say to somebody, "Are you my mentor?" You need to find somebody you trust, and somebody you can open up to, somebody that, will tell you honest feedback. And, as Warren Buffett said, honesty is an expensive gift. Don't expect it from cheap people. And when you get into more and more things, you find that people don't want to tell you things, because they mightn't know for a start, but secondly, they don't want to offend you. And, that's not a great thing. Honesty is a very expensive gift, and, you need to hear it. And back to that point, you need to hear it, and ideally you need to listen to it, and then you need to do something about it. But that's what mentorship really is. It's about, feedback, and it's about support, and it's about helping you build on those two things to be the better of yourself.
And how do you see mentorship and coaching either complementing or competing against each other?
I think, my experience has been that coaching is probably slightly more goal specific, a slightly more probably short-termist in a respect. And I think mentorship is the longer relationship that exists, that builds upon experience. That's certainly how I have seen it. I have been the recipient of coaching for specific things, for specific tasks, to achieve specific outcomes, and it works very well. It's very disciplined, it's very focused, it's very pointed. But the mentorship is a longer, much more holistic, much more sort of, if you like, strategic piece around, probably a less pointed change, and a more longer term sort of transition from something to something else.
So could you say that a coach is more intervention based and a mentor is more vision based, potentially?
That's a very good point. Typically people talk about coaching when there's a problem that's quite obvious, whereas mentorship is much more that sort of support holding role, guiding role, maybe, and much more value add than just solving problem. And the value of a really good mentor is somebody who's been very well experienced and round the block. And typically when you're sort of saying something to them, well, they've heard it before, or they can access or identify with insights or support that would be useful in that situation. So I think a mentor is always somebody who's always a little bit further along in their career, a little bit further along in life, because I think they've got the value of looking back with proper introspection.
Interesting. And do you think a mentor should they be within the industry that you're working, or can a mentor offer externalize and not be from your industry?
I'm not an industry specific person. I have always thought there's a lot of value in working across industry. And I think that it becomes very dangerous when you become very pigeonholed in industries. And back to that point I made about, diversity of thought. I think when you work with different people in different industries, in different geographies, in different cultures, you get an insight that's so broad and so challenging and quite frankly so valuable. That's really truthfully much better than having somebody who's just in your industry, knows the people you're talking about, and is trying to problem solve a problem that they've done before. I just don't think that's as much value add. I'm not sure as in business we're always very good at recognizing the value of cross industry. I think there are a lot of industries that think, what would you know about insurance if you've never worked in insurance? What would you know about sport if you've never worked in sport? What would you know about sales if you've never worked in sales? The truth of the matter is we've all bought insurance. The truth of the matter is most of us have played sport. And thirdly, most of us have either bought something and been at the receiving end of it. So actually, I do know quite a little bit about that, or somebody will know a little bit about that, because, life is full of experiences, and, most of us have had, the opportunity to experience quite a bit.
Yeah, exactly. And in the Dads in Business methodology, we break down dad life, if you like, into 4 core areas. There's always obviously the work life, there's also family life, there's money life, and there's yourself. And I think everything that we have conversations around fall into one of those 4 broad buckets, if you like. And I think if you can find a mentor, we just assume a mentor is a business professional mentor, but you could have a mentor around your money. You could have a mentor around family life. You could have a mentor for yourself, right? And I just think there's that assumption that a mentor is professional, and it doesn't have to be, I guess.
And you can have a group of mentors. I mean, you don't have to have one. I mean, and that's the other thing about a mentor is, that actually there are times when that person, is maybe less involved with you in something. And, so I think you need to probably collect along the way a few people that can be mentors for specific sort of purposes and elements that they might be able to help you with.
Yeah, and I think it's always something that we advocate is building that team. Even if you are on your own, build a team, a support network around you, and collaborate with them, because from that, as we mentioned early on, with the collisions of people comes new ideas, I guess. And it's probably a good time to segue into innovation, and from that collaboration and teamwork spins out new ideas and innovation and product innovation and service innovation. And Judith, I wonder if now's a good time to introduce us to what you're on with now, because it's far removed from working with Office of the Prime Minister and establishing an organisation there, to now you are a one-woman band, I assume you are.
Well, a small organisation, yes, and an entrepreneur, I suppose, is the other title that I think you put with. So I've set up, created a startup called Reason, and it has developed a protective headband for use in sport to reduce brain trauma. So over the last couple of years here in the UK, we've probably become aware of increasing media profile around knocks to the head in sport and the potential long-term consequences of that. And it's been on the back of a number of years of growing awareness in the US, particularly around American football. So based on everything we've just been talking about in terms of collaboration and insight, I brought together a team of global experts in neuroscience, biomechanics, manufacturing, product design, fashion apparel, sports apparel. And we developed a protective headband that essentially you wear in contact sports, rugby, hockey, football, hockey, etc. And that very simple headband reduces what are called rotational forces to the brain. When you take an impact in these contact sports, it is for the most part an angled hit to the head. Very rarely does the top of the head take an impact with the ball just coming from the heavens, or you take a straight hit to the forehead. You take, for the most part, an angled hit to the head from the ball, from another elbow, from another head, from the ground, from a post. And when you take that, it creates these rotational forces, and that rotates the brain inside the skull, and that shears the brain cells. And unless you do something to reduce those rotational forces, your brain will move. And we developed the headband specifically to reduce the transmission of those rotational forces to the brain, and therefore reduce your risk of a life-changing or a career-ending concussion or brain trauma. And we're pretty far ahead on this. We have our product into market. We are the first and only legal product of its type in the UK and Europe, because we've secured a very special type of CE mark called Category 2 Personal Protective Equipment, a CE mark, which we secured in Italy. And we're starting to do a pioneering pilot study in women's sport. And women is a particular interest in this because women are more impacted by a concussion or a brain trauma than man, by about ×3, for reasons of how brain cells are different in women, proestrogen, and other differences. And this has been known for 20 years. And yet, you know, players, coaches, medics still treat women the same as men when they take a knock to head. And it's also significant for anybody under 23, you know, whether you're male or female, because your brain does not fully develop the protective coating on brain cells in a process called myelination until your early 20s. So some of our most famous youth footballers still have a brain that's very vulnerable, and our rugby players as well. So this product, British made, manufactured in Sheffield, has brought together a global team of experts. And that's been facilitated by reaching out and asking people their ideas. But it comes back to one very simple question, which most innovation does. And the simple question that I've been asking for 21 years is, why do you protect your shins and not your brain? And no one could ever tell me that. And that's what I think innovation comes back to. One simple question. We never woke up one day and said we're going to make a protective headband, but we did say, why are we not protecting our brain? Because at the end of the day, the brain determines your performance in sport and in life. From your brain is your processing, your personality, your moods. Your brain makes you unique. It is the most complicated object on this earth, sat inside your skull. This is a fact that I think blows people away. There is 850,000 kilometers of wiring in your brain. The distance from the Earth to the moon, 384,000.
You get to the moon and back, and on your way there again.
Yeah, and you know, in sport we focus below the neck. We focus on our hamstrings. We focus on our shins, or we focus on speed. We focus on agility and strength. What about above the neck? And so yeah, so that was to your question about innovation. You know, it comes back to one really very hard question, and from that then bringing a group of people together with really diverse insights and thoughts and views, and collectively coming to a position, and in this instance a product to market.
So I mean, thank you for the background. We'll dive more into the product if you don't mind. I think it's a real interesting point for conversation. I think I scribbled a few bits down when you were saying I brought together a team, to go back to the early part of the conversation, of experts from neuroscience and product design and every facet of what it was. I guess that suggests you recognize and know your own weaknesses potentially. Is there a risk that you were bringing in people to just say yes to everything, or did you purposely bring people in to challenge your thought process?
100%. I mean, you know, I think you're doomed from the outset and fail from the outset if you bring in people like you, because all of a sudden you create a very, very insular. It doesn't matter what you're developing or designing, or, you know, once you start bringing in people like you, you're just developing something for a very, 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 very small group of people. And I deliberately brought people in that were challenging of each other, challenging of me, some very far forward focused, very future focused in their thinking, very future focused in their research, and other people who are, you know, perhaps a little bit behind. Because I wanted to understand the best of the past and the best of what can come, and find that. And I think that's really important, you know, when you are developing things. And that's right across when I think back about previous work I've done as well. You know, you've really just got to, you know, tolerate sometimes things that are quite uncomfortable to hear. You've got to listen, because, you know, there's something in what people are saying, and you've got to be really open to feedback and criticism and challenge. And you can't, you know, it's wrong to just close it down. You've got to listen to it, respect it, and you know, take some time to reflect on it.
I guess when you're so wedded to an idea, it's hard to take. You take feedback as criticism.
Oh, and you take it really personally. I mean, you know, and it's nothing anybody ever says is intended to be personal to you. I mean, they are talking about a product, or they're talking about an outcome or an output. And that's why I think when you're working on developing something, it's really important to have that team, because I think then you can, essentially, it helps you not becoming too personally wedded to it. That's not to say you don't have accountability, you don't have responsibility, but it just stops you becoming really personally involved in it, and it allows you to understand this more in context, and it allows you as well to appreciate and perhaps understand what people's feedback is, because other people can help you interpret it and understand it.
Yeah, it's an interesting topic, and I think I've just made a couple of notes. I mean, the second point I picked up on was it's been manufactured in Sheffield, and I live in Sheffield, so that's a shout out to Sheffield there. Good stuff. Innovation, I mean, if you don't mind, just have a talk about innovation for small business and then innovation for larger organizations, perhaps a culture of innovation. But do you think for smaller business, and I just scribbled a question on here, does innovation come from diverse, as in problems? Do you have to have had a trauma to want innovation? And it's a bit of a leading question, because I know very broadly where the background of your product came from. It was from, I guess, trauma, a background of something happened. And does that have to happen for us to look forwards for innovation? But what can smaller businesses specifically do?
I think, you know, smaller businesses are usually harder hit by problems. I mean, bigger organizations can throw money at things, they can throw people at things, and they can support a culture of ongoing innovation, almost for the sake of innovation. Smaller organizations and individuals don't have the luxury of those resources. They don't have even the luxury of time. And therefore, usually innovation comes from a real need and understanding a problem. One of the things that I think was very pertinent to me was that, you know, a number of years ago when I was at school, I watched a school friend take a knock to the head. And at the time, and as much the case today, that knock to the head was just dismissed as a knock to the head. That went on to change that woman's life for the worse. And a number of years ago, my father was diagnosed with dementia. And you see the end of, you know, the neurodegenerative decline when it comes to that. And there's a very personal story behind that for me. Some people see that, some people experience something that is life-changing or an insight into life. Some people don't. You know, Henry Ford made that fantastic comment. I mean, we know Henry Ford as the man who brought, you know, motor cars and the Ford automobile company to life, but he was actually a very early sort of business writer, and he said if he had have asked people what they'd wanted, they'd have said faster horses. So he could see beyond, he could see the future. And I think there are a lot of people, you know, who are small startups who see the future. And the problem is when you're a small startup, people laugh at you and they close the door on you. When you're a bigger organization and you come up with something, people listen to you because there's a brand, because there's the opportunity to buy time. And that's one of the challenges with innovation when it starts small, is that, you know, it's very easy for people to say, and I get this all the time. People say to me, oh, it doesn't work. Well, I'm sorry, but, you know, we've got these experts, we've done this testing. You know, it's not with respect, you know, it's just not, you can't say it doesn't work, you've got to listen to it. But it's easy for them to do it, whereas it's much more difficult when, you know, Apple brings something out. It's very hard for the person at the bus stop to say, oh, it doesn't work. I mean, people think it's Apple, you know, who are you? So I think bigger organizations have the luxury, as I say, of time and resource and brand that allow them to be heard. That's a much bigger challenge when you're a small startup or an individual with an idea that you want to bring into a concept, bring into market, and bring into change.
There's a lot of challenges for small businesses, isn't there? And I think it either tests or builds your resilience, because you're getting poked. I remember when I was made redundant, and that's what spurred me to go into self-employment. There were comments like, when are you going to get a proper job? Why are you doing that? Why are you messing about working for yourself? Go and get a job, because that's what they see as normal. That's what you should do. And because we have ideas that they can't see doesn't make those ideas wrong. And you're right, it's a small business. You've been silly. Larger business, they've been innovative.
Oh yeah, it's that perception, and I think it's also quite hard as a woman sometimes when you're taking on sectors. I mean, I think sport is difficult, in some of the conversations I have, and people say, is this just made for women? No, brain injuries for everyone. And I think as well, something about our sort of funding culture here in the UK is quite tough as well. I mean, it's very, very hard to get investment for early stage businesses. The grant structure, people talk about all this money in terms of grants and things like that. Very, 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 very competitive, and bigger organizations fishing in the same grant pool. And then, you go to look at investor, and an investor quite rightly wants as much as they can, as much progress as they can to put their money into it. And you often find then a situation of, moving goalposts around that. So you're right. One of the key skills is perseverance. You've got to persevere. You've got to, not in a way that you're blind to this. You cannot become drunk on your own idea. You cannot become anesthetized on your own idea. And that's, again, the really good point about why you need to build a global team of experts. You need to bring a diversity of challenge and opinion to what you're doing, because very suddenly those people are the people who sober you up. They're the people who wake you up, and they tell you just what it is. And the longer you go without that challenge, of course, the greater risk that you could find yourself, into a really, 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 sort of rabbit hole of an idea.
Yeah, this is it. It's an interesting balance, isn't it? Because I guess the negative of that is you've been stubborn, and you won't listen. You've been stubborn. But I guess if you have that trusted network, going back to the collaborative side and the team,
yeah,
it's their responsibility to check the weather, if you like, and to keep you accountable and challenge that. And as long as you're okay to respond, listen, hear it, and respond to it, you can have better conversations, can't you?
Yeah, but the really, I suppose, the most mature of leaders are the people who can take that on board. When you just close it down, actually, you're not being mature about that. And I suppose one of the things that this week in the press was obviously listening to the trial of Elizabeth Holmes, the lady who had set up this very £9 billion Silicon Valley startup that had taken significant sums from very high profile investors. And she got a lot of criticism for rightly so, and was obviously found guilty. But she got a lot of criticism because she really just believed in her idea and would not accept at some point that it wasn't going to work. And I do think that some of that was because she didn't have the right, well, she might have had the right people around her. Were they vocal enough? Don't know. But certainly she wasn't going to listen. And I think that's, you got to question who her mentor was, if she did have one. And I suspect she didn't have one.
She probably didn't have one, no.
Yeah.
And I guess from that, Judith, how, in your experience from what you've seen or what you've experienced from your own projects, how do you know when to let go?
I think that's a really good question, and I think it's a hard one. For me, I think you've got to look at things in stages. You've got to look at almost gating ideas. When something starts as an idea, you've got to do that initial piece of research to understand the feasibility, how big a challenge this is. I think you've got to evaluate your own effort and your own time in that. One of the things about innovation is you need endless amounts of energy and time. And that's the first thing, am I up for this? Is this a good idea, but it's better for somebody else? And then the second thing is then, doing sort of that initial sort of feasibility, that sort of discovery work that sort of says, yeah, there's legs to this, or there's not, or actually there's a product that does exactly this, or actually I'm doing early insight. Nobody's interested in my idea because there's this out here, and actually they wouldn't buy this. So you've really got to understand, and that's not to say that you're not customer led. I don't mean by that you should only do what you think the customers. Back to Henry Ford's comment, you've got to be brand led. You've got to create a brand. You've got to think about what your product is. You've got to think about how you're going to position it. But I think you have to stage and gate everything. And I don't think anybody who's in innovation, starts off on day one and is in the lucky position that they never evaluated or never reviewed. I know from my own personal story that I have evaluated and reviewed this at least at 3 significant points, either on test results, funding, my own perseverance, etc. Things that you sort of milestones, as much like you would do in the rest of a business. There are milestones that you sort of think, this is a line in the sand I need to think about.
And were you prepared at those 3 key stages for the answer to be, we need to let it go?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I've always had that in mind, either let it go completely or let it go to somebody else, because sometimes you only can take things so far. Sometimes you're not the right person. You might be the right person to develop something, but you might not be the right person to sell it. You might be the right person to design it, but not the right person to oversee the commercials around manufacturing. You might not be the right person who's the end consumer, so therefore you're not making some of the final design decisions. And that's again, just back to this point about building a team of experts and insights, and then also listening to the feedback that you get. And everybody will give feedback. When you're asked to give feedback, sometimes it encourages people to be a critic. So they think feedback is essentially they have to shoot it down, they have to criticize it. That's not what feedback is. Feedback, is both positive and negative.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it goes back to that. You need to be open to welcoming that feedback and the trusted team, or build processes that allow that feedback to happen. Too often we hear from large companies that we work with that we don't ask that because we don't like the answers.
Yeah.
So if I don't ask, it doesn't exist, does it? It's just
correct. And you don't have to look at small startups. You can look at large corporate failures where there hasn't been a full exercise done on hearing and listening to some of that feedback.
Yeah, and I guess just briefly, if you don't mind touching on larger organizations, again, from your experience working with larger companies, how are they putting good ideas to work? How are they encouraging that feedback to, I guess, travel up from the foot soldiers workforce to leadership? Does that happen, or is there a block?
See, I think that's where larger organizations have so much luxury, in the sense that they have time and money and support networks and to facilitate that. I mean, every large organization wants to encourage innovation and new ideas. So they have essentially a mechanism that allow people to input, either a customer or staff to input into it, and they're rewarded. And then they have, the ability of a team to sift through those ideas to essentially then see what is, what might work, what might not work. So a lot of that sort of early work in terms of idea generation, idea sifting, early sort of feasibility. Large organizations can do that. When back to that point I was saying about, if you're an entrepreneur or you're a small startup, you have to do those things, with very little time and very little resource and very little support. And that's sometimes why bigger organizations can implement an idea to reality very, very, very quickly, because they have.
And I guess they can afford to lose some ideas because the risk is relatively low. Whereas for smaller organizations, the risk is relatively big. It almost always has to work. And the amount of pressure relative to the risk is vast on the smaller businesses, I expect, than the large
reputation. The reputation of going down into something that's a folly. That again is the perception of that. It's seen as a massive disadvantage in a smaller organization, and just a matter of learning in a bigger organization. So it's a hard positioning exercise for the smaller business.
It is, and I think for me there's benefit or opportunity, and I'll probably start rounding up with how you think organizations can start to spot those opportunities. But for me, smaller companies can learn from large organizations. They can research. I do a lot of reading around Amazon, for example, or very customer centric, truly customer centric organizations where the customer's expectations transcend just Amazon. It's like, well, Amazon can do this, why can't you? And we are put on the same bar for comparison almost. And I think therefore the opportunity for smaller businesses is, well, what do they do? I'll go and really look at how they do it, what they do. We're not saying go in and be the Amazon, but what can you borrow from them that works so well? How can you put that customer culture at the center, for example?
And we live at the most information-rich time of our lives, where you actually can find out. There is very little that you can find out about the most highly performing and successful organizations, because most of them want to tell about what they've done well.
Yeah.
Whereas, you roll back 30 years ago and 40 years ago, and that insight would have been so commercially sensitive that, people did not share it, and it was not widely known. And we live in a world where information is so freely available, and people work right across different geographies, and they bring such different experiences that you usually can get your hands on that insight.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it'd be a good starting point. We've all got Google at our fingertips. I guess we can just look outside of our sectors at a company we admire or a personality we admire and see what they do and try and take small steps, which is relatively, I guess, low risk financially. It's just a commitment to time, which obviously has a cost to itself too. But I guess, Judith, to start wrapping up, in terms of spotting opportunities for organizations beyond personal adversity, if you like, that inspires that motivation, how can smaller organizations, I guess, start to create that culture of innovation? But what can they also do to start spotting opportunities when they're busy on the tools, if you like? They're busy at work. How can they start to create and generate that culture or resource or time to start looking for opportunities for the next innovation?
Self-awareness. You've got to be aware of the world around you. You've got to, back to that point, you've got to listen and you've got to hear. What are people talking about? What are people thinking? What are you thinking? What are you seeing around you? What are your customers telling you? What else is happening in your market? You need to have a radar that's really finely tuned to all that's happening around you. To say we're busy, and for organizations, no matter what size you are, to say we're too busy, it just doesn't cut it, because everybody's got the same excuse, and yet every day people are coming up with new ideas, new products, new insights. You've got to imagine the future. So if you do think about what it is that you want to, you have to think about, what does 2031 look like, 2032 look like? And you've got to develop your own design principles. What is it that you're putting behind that? So when you're spotting opportunities, there's one thing being aware of the opportunity, but what is this opportunity to you? What are these design principles? What do you want to stand up for against this? And I think that's really quite important. We're probably now at a point in time where people are starting to appreciate and value differentiation. Whether you manufacture in the UK, whether you give back to charity, whether you get your workforce from X, Y, and Z, people want sustainability if it's a product. People like differentiation. They want to make an informed choice about who they buy from and what they buy. And having something that's differentiated comes back to your design principles at the outset. So I would say those are my things around spotting. You've got to see around you, you've got to imagine the future, and you've got to differentiate. And that differentiation will appeal to some or not. And out of that, you create your own opportunities.
That's it. You can't please everyone. Not everyone's a customer, and that's perfectly fine. But if you can create a solution for a small defined group of people,
yeah, and with values that you stand behind. Back to that point of differentiation, I think that's values. I think we've come to appreciate in the last couple of years a number of trends, sustainability. We are asking about the things we buy. How are they disposed? How are they reused? We're asking about the working conditions of the people who make it. What are these people being paid a living wage? Are these people, doing that? So, we're becoming more self-aware ourselves of, what we're putting our own support behind.
No, absolutely. And Judith, it's been a fascinating chat, and I'd just like to round off with reminding listeners and viewers about your new product. When's it coming to market? How can we find out more about it and you? Where can we connect? What's the story?
So the good news is it's in market. It came into market late last year, 2021. So it's fully in market. You will see it on the heads of sports people across a number of sports this season. And if you check out our website, Reason, REZON, wear.com. We're on Instagram and Facebook. We'd love to hear from you, and love to hear from individuals, from coaches, from parents, from clubs, from schools. And I just would finish off by saying this, that the brain is what determines our performance in sport and in life, whether you choose to have a business career or whatever it is, and therefore protecting your performance is something really important. And I think in time we'll start to appreciate more the brain in life and in our bodies, because at the moment we sort of typically focus below the neck rather than thinking about what makes us us.
No, I think it's a fascinating place to end, Judith, and thank you very much for spending time with us today to share. I think it's been a great chat around collaboration, teamwork, and innovation. I think there's so much more that can be done there, and thank you very much for sharing so many insights. Really, really good chat.
Thank you very much, Rob, and thanks to everyone for listening.
Thanks, Judith. Take care.
Bye-bye.